Prologue. The letter. I had scarcely finished buttering a second slice of toast when Poirot, with the air of a conjurer producing a rabbit from a silk hat, set an envelope upon my plate. "Observe, mon ami," he said, "a letter that announces itself with the tact of a tombstone. On cream paper of excellent quality. The address had been struck in a compact masculine hand. Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Private and urgent. The seal was black. There was no sender's name, only the embossed crest of a raven perched upon a shield. I slit it open, and 2 items slid out, a single sheet of notepaper and a small, stiff rectangle, an engraved place card from some dinner table. On the card, in fine copperplate, was written, "Good night, Mr. Coffin." Ghastly humour, I murmured. A practical joke? "No," said Poirot, "a challenge." He took the notepaper and smoothed it with his forefinger as though soothing a fretful child. The letter unsigned read, "Monsieur Poirot, you love order. Come then to a house of disorder." On the 12th evening of August, a company gathers to put to rest a quarrel that should have been interred years ago. At midnight one will say, "Good night, Mr. Coffin," and the man so addressed will not awaken again. There is a will to be read, a wrong to be righted, and a debt to be paid. If justice interests you more than propriety, attend at Coffin Hall during the storm that has already begun. The Raven knows the way. "Signed by melodrama itself," I said. "Coffin Hall." "It exists," Poirot replied quietly. "Near Brackenford, in Surrey. A very old family, and a very old name. Not quite Coffins in the English box for the dead, you understand. It was a Norman corruption. Coffin, later Coffin, now prudently modernized in some branches as Coffin. Names, Hastings, are like furniture. In certain houses, they are too heavy to move. Then the Mr. Coffin of the card may be a man, a title, a jest, or a threat," he finished. "The author intends ambiguity. He wishes to seat us at the table before the soup is served. And the Raven," Poirot tapped the crest, "a family device, or someone who wants us to believe it is. You observe the paper. Rag content high, watermark continental. The envelope was posted last night in Brackenford." He held up the stamp with tweezers. "And it was carried by a hand accustomed to writing for others. See here, the pressure points of a trained copyist, a secretary perhaps, but—" He turned the place card over. On the reverse, a faint wax smear had caught an impression of a miniature key. Someone who handled this was in haste to pocket something. They fumbled. "You mean to go?" He gave that small feline smile which always preceded an adventure. "But certainly. When one is invited so courteously to prevent a murder, it would be rude to decline." We arrived at Brackenford beneath a sky the colour of old pewter. The storm, if not yet begun, certainly had its hand upon the doorknob. Coffin Hall announced itself as a low, rambling house of honeyed stone, Elizabethan in temper, with narrow windows and an avenue of yews that made a tunnel of the drive. Over the great oak door, the raven crest had been carved and weathered smooth by generations of rain. A butler with the melancholy air peculiar to butlers in old houses admitted us. "Mr. Arlen expects you, sir," he said to Poirot, "if you would follow me." In the library, panelled oak, a long table laid as though for council, stood our host, Arlen Coffin, lean as a rapier, his hair prematurely silver, his eyes quick and weary. He took Poirot's hand with gratitude that was almost relief. "You came. Thank God," he said. "I feared you would take it for a hoax." "On the contrary," Poirot replied, "it is the hoax that interests me least. To whom am I to say bonjour, and I trust not good night?" Arlen's mouth twitched. "To my family, and to those, what shall I call them, attached by blood or money." We dine tonight to hear my aunt's will. Margaret Coffin, Margaret Rains, as she styled herself after a quarrel with my father, died 6 weeks ago. The will is to be read at midnight, by her instruction, and in our dining room, also by her instruction. She had a taste for theatre. And for ravens? I asked. Arlen glanced at the crest over the mantel. That is older than any of us, but yes, my aunt adored her symbols. He hesitated. You received a letter. Poirot took it from his pocket. Arlen read, paled, and passed a hand across his eyes. It is abominable, but apt. My aunt never forgave my father for restoring the name to Coffin from Coffin. If you insist on coffins, she used to say, they will insist on you. And now, he gestured helplessly, this. Tell me, said Poirot, who will be present at this little drama? Family first, Arlen said, counting on his fingers. My younger sister Viola, recently returned from Florence, and under the impression that the world is a stage built expressly for her entrance. My cousin Edwin Rains, the last favourite of Aunt Margaret, a man of letters when letters pay, and of business when business paid more. Mrs. Penelope March, my aunt's companion and shade, who knows where the bodies are not so much buried as misfiled. Dr. Lionel Shaw, our neighbour and my aunt's physician, who adored her brand of suffering. Mr. Quill, the solicitor, who will read the will, and, he paused, distaste evident, Mr. Damon Black, a financier of the more modern stripe. He lent my aunt money on certain expectations he intends, I suspect, to collect. And the servants, said Poirot. Carter, the butler, Mrs. Tukes, housekeeper, a cook, and 2 maids, loyal, all of them, or at least weary enough to appear so. Poirot's eyes had gone half closed. And you, monsieur, Arlen, do you expect to inherit? Arlen laughed without mirth. I expect fireworks. Tell me of your aunt's last days, said Poirot softly. Her mind, her mood. She was iron, Arlen said. Even as she died, she directed the arrangements, midnight, the hall, the family present, the solicitor to read, and the thunder, if possible. I do not ask you to love me, she said to me, only to be on time. And this phrase, good night, Mr. Coffin, I ventured, the chill of the words creeping back upon me. Was it an old jest in the family? Arlen's gaze slid to the window, where the first drop of rain struck and ran like a tear. It was what my aunt said to my father the night he left this house 20 years ago. He died a month later in a motor accident. She never said it again, not aloud. Poirot's glance sharpened. Ah! From the corridor came a quick, petulant footstep and the rustle of silk. A young woman swept in, dark hair, bright eyes that measured and dismissed in a single pass, a scarf tossed like a flag. You kept us waiting, Arlen, and this must be, oh, Monsieur Poirot, the famous little man with the famous little grey cells. I am Viola. You will forgive me for being delighted that someone at least finds our family irresistible. Poirot bowed. I am charmed, mademoiselle. She leaned upon the table, tapping the engraved place card Poirot had set down. What a nasty joke! Aunt Margaret would have approved. She had a genius for discomfort. We shall endeavour, said Poirot, to disappoint her ghost. Lightning flared, whitening the long windows. In the sterile second of brightness I saw, reflected in the glass, a cluster of figures at the doorway, half curious, half afraid. A woman with pinched lips, Mrs. March surely. A tall man with a physician's frown, Doctor Shaw. Another with the nervous air of a clerk ripe for success, Edwin. A sleek fellow whose cufflinks were small fortunes, Mr. Black. And behind them a gent with a satchel and a conscience, Mr. Quill. The butler hovered like a punctuation mark that refused to decide itself. "Dinner is at 8, sir," Carter intoned, "and the reading at midnight." "Just so," said Arlen. "Everyone, this is Monsieur Poirot, who is here as a guest." "Ah, non," Poirot corrected with courtesy, "as a witness, and perhaps, if fortune favors, an interruption." Thunder followed the lightning, long and rolling, as though the old house itself were clearing its throat before a speech. Poirot lifted the place card once more, studied the elegant, cruel calligraphy of its message, and slid it into his pocket. "Until midnight, then," he said. "Between now and good night, we shall make ourselves acquainted with the house, with the company, and with each person's idea of justice." He straightened his tie, glanced at the raven carved above us, and smiled that small, precise smile that always made me pity murderers before he had even named them. "The storm," he murmured, "has indeed begun. Hey, detective, quick question. Where in the world are you solving mysteries from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you want more twisted tales, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's case, it gets even creepier. Stay sharp." Chapter 2. Arrival at Coffin Hall. The rain had deepened from a polite tapping to a steady percussion by the time we were shown to our rooms. Coffin Hall, for all its ancient stone and Elizabethan proportions, had the peculiar smell of a place too long anticipating an event, beeswax and disuse, as though it had been polished and left to wait for a curtain that never rose. My own chamber was large and draughty, its mullioned window framing the yew-lined drive. In the hearth, a reluctant fire struggled against the damp. I could hear, faint but distinct, the sound of someone's laughter from somewhere along the corridor, a quick, brittle ripple that stopped as suddenly as it began. Poirot, installed in the adjoining room, had not yet unpacked. Instead, he stood before a small escritoire, turning over the writing implements one by one. "You observe, Hastings," he said without looking up, "that our host has provided for correspondence in the grand manner. Yet," he held up an envelope, "the paper here does not match that of our anonymous letter. An inconsistency, yes?" I nodded. "You think the letter was not written here?" "I think it was not written openly here," he replied. "But come, mon ami, it is time to descend. We must make ourselves a part of the scenery before the first act begins." The drawing-room was already gathering its cast. Viola lounged on a chaise near the fire, idly trailing one finger along the rim of a wine-glass. Across from her, Mr. Damon Black, sleek hair, sleeker smile, was recounting a tale of a business venture in Monte Carlo, the sort that begins with champagne and ends with bankruptcy, though in his telling it ended with profit. Mrs. Penelope March sat bolt upright in a straight-backed chair, her thin hands folded in her lap, eyes flicking from speaker to speaker, like a ledger clerk tallying the cost of every word. Beside her stood Edwin Raines, dapper but rumpled, as though his tailor had done his best with a man who would never quite behave like a mannequin. Dr. Lionel Shaw entered last, a tall man with the air of one accustomed to gravitas, his gaze assessing each of us as though we were patients' ailments might yet be classified. Mr. Quill, the solicitor, hovered near the door, his satchel clutched as if it contained the crown jewels. Arlen Coffin made the necessary introductions. Poirot, all graciousness, bowed and murmured pleasantries, yet I could see his eyes flicking, noting the tightness of a handshake here, the hesitation before a greeting there. By the time Carter announced dinner, he had, I was certain, already formed a private hierarchy of tension in the room. The dining room was lit by a great central chandelier, its candles throwing a golden haze over silver and crystal. Place cards marked each setting. Mine lay between Dr. Shaw and Mrs. March. Poirot found himself between Viola and Mr. Quill, a position I suspected was less than accidental. Conversation over the soup was stilted, the kind of talk in which every remark is weighed for hidden barbs. Damon Black inquired after the estate's value with such casualness that it became intrusive. Mrs. March spoke archly of Aunt Margaret's particular stipulations. Edwin Raines hinted at certain bequests with the air of a man fishing in troubled waters. It was Poirot who broke the unease. "Monsieur Arlan," he said, "I understand your aunt had a fondness for theatricals. Did she often stage such gatherings?" Arlan smiled thinly. "Only when she wished to remind us that she was the axis upon which we revolved." "Indeed," murmured Poirot, "and tonight, perhaps, she will revolve us still." The words had scarcely left his lips when a sharp crack of thunder rattled the window panes. In the pause that followed, I noticed Mrs. March's hand tighten round her wine-glass until the knuckles blanched. After the main course, Viola leaned toward Poirot. "You know, monsieur, I'm almost disappointed you're here. Half the fun of these affairs is watching people trip over their own lives. You'll have them walking straight." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mademoiselle, you mistake me. I do not compel people to walk straight. I merely notice where they have walked crooked." She laughed, but there was an edge to it. When dessert was cleared, Mr. Quill reminded us that the will would be read at midnight, per the late Mrs. Raines's express instruction. Carter brought coffee. The storm intensified, and the sense of waiting, for what precisely none would say, grew heavier. It was then that the lights flickered. Only for a moment, but long enough for me to catch, in that brief shadow, the pale oval of Mrs. March's face turned toward Damon Black with an expression I could not read. Fear, warning, or something else entirely. When the lights steadied, Poirot rose, bowed to the table, and said, "If you will excuse me, I should like a small promenade about the house before midnight. The architecture of such places, it fascinates me." He caught my eye and nodded toward the door. I followed him into the corridor, where the thunder rolled like distant drums. "Hastings," he said softly, "already I feel the draught from an open grave. Before midnight, someone here will indeed say, 'Good night, Mr. Coffin,' and the man so addressed will not hear the dawn." Chapter 3. Dinner and Suspicions. The storm's voice grew more insistent as the minutes drew us toward midnight. In the corridor, the portraits of Coffin ancestors watched with painted solemnity, their dark eyes seeming to share the same private joke. That we, like so many before, had entered a house where family was merely the polite mask for rivalry. Poirot and I returned to the drawing-room, where coffee had given way to brandy. The air was thick with cigar smoke, conversation curling in the same slow spirals. It was the kind of gathering in which every sentence felt rehearsed, yet every glance was improvised. Damon Black was holding forth to Edwin Raines about the virtues of liquidity, a speech which seemed less about finance than about reminding the room of his own importance. Viola, now cross-legged in an armchair, looked at him as though he were a particularly dull play she had been forced to sit through. Mrs. March sat slightly apart, her eyes half-lidded, but her ears undoubtedly keen. Poirot, ever the listener, moved from group to group like a courteous shadow. When he reached Dr. Shaw, I drifted near enough to overhear. "You were Madame Raines's physician?" Poirot asked. "Indeed," Shaw replied, his voice low and deliberate. "Margaret was complicated, physically sound for her age, but she enjoyed the idea of frigidity. It made people attentive. A useful ailment, Poirot murmured. The doctor's mouth twitched. Amusement or disapproval, I could not say. She kept her mind sharp to the end, sharp enough to arrange things. Poirot tilted his head. Such as this midnight reading? Exactly. She liked to stage. Shaw's eyes swept the room, and a cast she could control. Only now she isn't here to hold the strings. Before Poirot could reply, Carter entered with the air of a man fulfilling a ritual. Mr. Quill asks that everyone gather in the dining room at 11:45, so there will be no delays. As the hour approached, I felt the atmosphere tighten like a coiled spring. Viola drifted toward Arlen and asked in a tone too light to be innocent, "Do you suppose Aunt Margaret's ghost will applaud the reading?" Arlen's reply was clipped. "If she does, it will be to mock us." "Mockery," Damon Black interjected smoothly, "is preferable to the alternative. I've known wills that tore families apart without the deceased ever intending it, but in this case—" He let the thought trail away with a shrug that begged for curiosity. Poirot, seated by the fire, looked up. "In this case," Black smiled, the sort of smile one uses when one is quite certain he has baited a hook. "In this case, I think she meant for the tearing to happen." Mrs. March's eyes flashed toward him, sharp as a scalpel. "You speak too freely, Mr. Black." "Do I? Or do I merely say what you will all be thinking in an hour's time?" The silence that followed was heavier than the thunder outside. At precisely 11:45, we filed back into the dining room. The table, cleared now of dinner's remains, held only a great silver candelabrum whose flames wavered in the draught. Place cards had been left exactly where they had been earlier. Mr. Quill stood at the head, his satchel before him. "If you will all be seated, we can proceed without delay when the hour strikes." Poirot took his seat between Viola and Quill, his eyes moving not over the solicitor, but the shadows at the edge of the room, the corners where a watcher might stand unseen. I leaned toward him. "You're expecting something before the reading." "Mais oui," he whispered. "The murderer, mon ami, is a creature of preparation, and the moment before a performance is when the stage is most vulnerable." From somewhere deep within the house came a sound, faint, metallic, and final, as though a key had turned in a lock. Several faces turned toward the noise. But before anyone could speak, the clock began its steady climb toward 12. Chapter 4. The First Incident. The clock's hands inched closer to midnight, each tick echoing like a hammer upon the nerves. The candle flames flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch with anticipation. The air was dense with silence, not the restful kind, but the charged pause before a crack of thunder. Suddenly, the heavy oak door to the dining room burst open with a force that sent a chill sweeping over us. Carter appeared, pale and breathless, holding out a trembling hand. "Mr. Allen, Mrs. March, you must come at once. There's been an accident in the library." Without hesitation, Arlen rose. Viola, her usual bravado replaced by startled worry, followed close behind. Poirot and I exchanged a glance, and were on our feet as well. The library door stood ajar, revealing a scene disrupted. Books scattered, a toppled chair, and most alarming of all, Mrs. Penelope March, seated on the floor, clutching her wrist with a grimace of pain. Near her lay a broken vase, its shards glittering like shards of glass caught in the candlelight. "Are you hurt, madame?" Poirot asked gently, as Arlen knelt beside her. She nodded, but her pale face was drawn tight. I slipped. Something gave way beneath me. Dr. Shaw hurried forward and examined her wrist with practiced hands. "A sprain. Nothing broken," he said. "But the question is, what caused the fall?" Arlen's eyes flicked to the overturned chair, and then to the rug beneath it, which was disturbed and bunched unevenly. "This rug, it looks as if someone tripped over it." "Or it was deliberately displaced," Poirot mused. "Accidents, mes amis, are often carefully engineered." Viola paced, frustration brimming. "Is this a game? A warning? Aunt Margaret's theatre seems more sinister than ever." From the doorway came Mr. Quill's calm voice. "Regardless of intent, this incident delays the reading. We must proceed with caution." Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face as if seeking the pulse beneath the calm. "Someone here wants to unsettle us, to remind us that the game is dangerous." A sudden knock at the far window drew our attention. Outside, lightning cleaved the sky, and a figure, shadowed and swift, moved beyond the glass before vanishing into the storm. Arlen tightened his jaw. We watched. The clock chimed the hour. The moment for the will's reading had come, but something had changed. The quiet menace hanging over Coffin Hall had thickened. Poirot stepped to the head of the table, the place card with its cruel message in his hand. "Mes amis, before we say good night, Mr. Coffin, we must ensure that no one among us is tempted to say it in reality." A collective breath was held, the unseen eyes behind the windows seemingly drawing closer. Tonight, the stage was set. Chapter 5. Clues and Red Herrings. The storm raged with a furious temper, rain hammering the windows as if demanding entry. Inside, the house seemed to tighten around us like a noose, every creak and sigh magnified by the thick walls of Coffin Hall. After Mrs. March was tended to and settled in a quieter room, the remaining company reconvened in the drawing-room. But the earlier conviviality had evaporated, replaced by a wary vigilance. Every glance exchanged was loaded with suspicion, every word carefully measured. Poirot stood near the hearth, his keen eyes flicking over the assembly. "Let us begin with the obvious," he said softly. "The displaced rug in the library. Monsieur Arlen, you observed it first." Arlen nodded. "Yes. It was as if someone had pulled it back hastily." Viola scoffed. "A trap. How theatrical. I suppose the killer fancies themselves a playwright." "On the contrary," Poirot said, "the simplest mechanism is often the most effective. But this is only one small piece." He turned to Dr. Shaw. "You attended Mrs. March closely. Was there any indication she might have been targeted beyond the fall?" Shaw frowned thoughtfully. "Nothing physical, but her expression suggested fear, not merely of falling, but of something unseen." "Fear is a curious clue," Poirot murmured. "Tell us, Monsieur Poirot." Edwin Raines interjected. "What do you make of the Raven Crest? It seemed to be mentioned in the letter, and looms large in this house." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A symbol can be many things: heritage, warning, or misdirection. The raven, associated with death and prophecy, may be a theatrical flourish, or a real message." He produced the place card from his pocket, letting the candlelight catch its elegant script. "Good night, Mr. Coffin. It is both greeting and farewell. Who among you has a reason to bid this final good night to another?" Damon Black smiled thinly. "A phrase like that can mean anything. Perhaps it's simply a family joke, morbid but harmless." Mrs. March's voice interrupted, brittle yet sharp. "A joke that has outlived its welcome, and one that has apparently inspired threats." Viola's gaze was hard. "Or warnings. Aunt Margaret was a master of those." Poirot's gaze settled on Mr. Quill. The solicitor, who will read the will at midnight. Tell us, sir, are you familiar with any unusual clauses or surprises within it?" Quill's lips pressed thin. "Only that the will is to be read in full at midnight, as directed. Anything else would be speculation." "Speculation," Poirot repeated, "is often where the truth lies hidden." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp rap on the door. Carter entered, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "From Monsieur Arlan," he said quietly, placing it on the table. Arlan unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small silver locket. He opened it, and a folded note slipped out. Poirot took the note, reading aloud, "Not all who inherit are alive to enjoy the prize. Watch the shadows where the raven flies." A shiver ran through the room. "More threats," muttered Arlan. "Or more puzzles," said Poirot. "And in puzzles, Hastings, the smallest piece can unlock the entire game." His eyes swept the room once more. "Observe each gesture, each glance, each hesitation. Among us lurks a hand eager to close the coffin lid. It is our task to discover whose." Chapter 6. A Private Confession. The hours grew late, and the storm outside settled into a relentless murmur, a low tide of rain against the ancient windows. Within Coffin Hall, the atmosphere thickened with secrets whispered behind closed doors, and eyes that lingered too long on unfamiliar faces. After the unsettling discovery of the locket and note, the household dispersed into uneasy clusters, seeking refuge from the mounting tension. Poirot, ever the astute observer, pulled me aside into the vast shadowed library, a room where the scent of old leather and wood smoke mingled with an intangible weight of memories. "I believe, Hastings," Poirot began, "that some truths are only revealed in the quiet moments, away from the gaze of others. Tonight I must speak privately with one who harbors more than just grief." As if summoned by his words, the door creaked open, and Arlan Coffin entered, his features drawn tight, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Indeed. Sit, s'il vous plaît. There is much we must discuss." Arlan took the offered chair, clasping his hands as though bracing against the storm within. "My aunt's death was complicated," he confessed, "more than illness or age." "I feared that old wounds," he confessed, "more than illness or age." "I feared that old wounds, family quarrels, debts, betrayals, might resurface like ghosts." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And did your aunt confide in you any fears, perhaps threats she had received?" Arlan hesitated. "Not in words, but I found her restless, secretive. She kept a small diary, which I discovered hidden among her papers." He pulled a worn leather-bound volume from his coat. These entries hinted a family secret, something buried long ago. "Adieu, betrayal by blood." Poirot leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Secrets are like venom, slow to act, but deadly in time." "Indeed," Arlan said quietly. "I am afraid that the past is clawing its way back, that good night, Mr. Coffin, is not just a jest, but a promise." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And promises, mon ami, are obligations that must be fulfilled, sometimes at a terrible cost." A faint knock at the door startled us. Arlan glanced toward it, unease flickering in his eyes. "Come in," Poirot called. Viola entered, her usual poise momentarily faltering as she regarded her brother. "Arlan, you've been away too long. The others wonder what is being whispered behind closed doors." Arlan rose stiffly. "Some conversations are best kept private, Viola." She smiled thinly. "Or perhaps some truths are too dangerous to reveal." Poirot's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "Danger and truth often dance together, mademoiselle." As Viola withdrew, closing the door behind her, Arlan sighed deeply. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot," he said, "do you believe a family can be destroyed by its own history?" "Sadly, I have seen it more than once," Poirot answered. "But also I have seen how truth, when gently unearthed, can lay even the deepest ghosts to rest." Arlen looked toward the storm-darkened window. "Then I hope your little grey cells are as sharp as ever, for I fear the night ahead is fraught with peril." Poirot smiled his enigmatic smile. "Fear not, mon ami. The night may be dark, but the smallest light can illuminate the deepest shadows." Chapter 7. Midnight Revelations. The pendulum of the ancient clock swung with solemn rhythm, each tick drawing us inexorably closer to midnight, the appointed hour for Aunt Margaret's will to be unveiled. The dining room was once again the scene of quiet anticipation, though the earlier warmth of candlelight was now tempered by an undercurrent of tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath. The assembled family and guests settled into their seats, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on faces taut with expectation. Carter, the butler, moved with precise solemnity, placing the thick leather-bound will before Mr. Quill. "Ladies and gentlemen," the solicitor began, voice steady but grave, "the late Mrs. Margaret Raines, née Coffin, left a will that will, I trust, bring clarity and resolution to her affairs. Please allow me to read it in full." As Quill's voice rose and fell with the measured cadence of the legal text, eyes darted about the room, some filled with hope, others with guarded suspicion. Poirot sat motionless, his fingers lightly clasped, ever vigilant for the subtle shifts that words might produce beyond their surface meaning. Then, as the final paragraph echoed into silence, a sharp intake of breath broke the stillness. Arlen's hand tightened around his chair's arm, and Viola's bright eyes shimmered with disbelief. The will was unusual. It disinherited the immediate family in favor of a distant relative previously unknown to them, a certain Isabel Trent, a woman described in vague terms as a keeper of secrets and bearer of truth. Furthermore, a sealed envelope was to be delivered to the family only upon the reading's conclusion. As the room digested the unexpected terms, a sudden flicker in the chandelier plunged the room into semi-darkness. A collective murmur rose, but Poirot's voice cut through it with quiet command. "Do not be alarmed. The storm affects the power. Let us await the candlelight." From the shadows at the far end of the room, Mrs. March rose, her voice brittle but clear. Aunt Margaret's final gesture was always dramatic. The sealed envelope is, I believe, the last act of her theatre. Mr. Quill produced the envelope and broke the seal with deliberate care. Inside was a letter, written in Aunt Margaret's unmistakable hand. "To those who gather here under the Raven's watch, trust is a fragile thing, shattered too easily by ambition and fear. The truth you seek lies not in gold or land, but in the heart of betrayal and sacrifice. Beware the hand that welcomes the night with a smile." A hush fell. Viola glanced sharply at Damon Black, who met her gaze with an inscrutable smile. Before anyone could speak, the door to the room slammed open. Carter stood framed in the doorway, face pale and eyes wide. "There's been another incident," he announced breathlessly. "In the East Wing, Edwin Raines has been found unconscious." Chaos erupted. Poirot was instantly at Arlen's side as we hurried toward the East Wing. The hallways were dim, lit only by swinging sconces that cast eerie shadows. Edwin lay sprawled on the floor of the sitting room, a gash on his temple, and his breath shallow but steady. Dr. Shaw knelt beside him, assessing quickly. "He was struck and left here," Shaw said grimly. "No sign of a weapon, but the blow was sufficient." Viola's face was pale as she whispered, "Who would harm him? What are we turning into?" Poirot's eyes, sharp and unwavering, swept the room once more. Mon ami, the night reveals many faces, some friendly, others fatal. Before this ends, we must know who among us will say, "Good night, Mr. Coffin," in more than words. Chapter 8. Puzzle Pieces. Scattered the sitting room, where Edwin Raines had been found, was heavy with the scent of old tobacco and faint perfume. The faintest echo of rain drummed against the windows, as Dr. Shaw worked swiftly to staunch the bleeding from Edwin's temple. The injury was severe, but thankfully not fatal, yet. As the household gathered, unease rippled through the group. Whispered questions hung in the air like smoke. Who would want to harm Edwin? What had he seen or known that made him a target? Poirot stood near the fireplace, steepling his fingers and observing with the sharp gaze of a hawk. "Monsieur Allen," he began, "may I ask, had Edwin Raines mentioned any threats or disputes recently? Anything that might shed light on this attack?" Allen shook his head, though his expression was troubled. "Not that he confided to me. Edwin was always secretive, especially regarding the family's affairs. But there had been tension between him and several others. The inheritance had stirred old resentments." Viola, pacing restlessly, added, "And Aunt Margaret's will, upending everything, only makes matters worse. Trust has fractured beyond repair." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, we are dealing with a web of motives, each thread tangled with old grievances and new ambitions." Turning his attention to the others, he continued, "Let us consider the facts as they stand. The displaced rug in the library, Mrs. March's fall, the threatening notes, and now this violent attack on Edwin. Each event is a piece of a larger puzzle." He walked slowly toward the window, peering out into the storm-darkened night. "But beware, Hastings, for some pieces are meant to mislead, red herrings that distract and confuse." Damon Black, standing stiffly, interjected, "Such as the anonymous threats, or the sealed envelope's cryptic warnings." "Precisely," Poirot replied. "The game is designed to provoke fear, suspicion, and division." Mrs. March, sitting quietly by the fire, broke her silence. Aunt Margaret was a master of psychological chess. Perhaps these events are her final moves from beyond the grave. Edwin stirred slightly, groaning as Dr. Shaw applied a cooling cloth to his forehead. I heard voices," he murmured, "in the east wing, just before I was struck. Someone arguing. I didn't see who, but the words, they mentioned betrayal." The room fell into a tense silence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Betrayal is the heart of many murders, Hastings, and here it beats loud and clear." He turned toward the assembled company. "We must keep a close watch. Tonight, the true nature of those present will begin to unravel." The storm's howl rose once more, rattling the window panes as if echoing his warning. Chapter 9. The Disappearance Repeats. The air in Coffin Hall had grown palpably colder, as if the storm outside had seeped into the very stones of the house. After Edwin's attack, the household was on edge, shadows seeming to lurk in every corner, and every creak carrying a threat. That night, the company gathered in the drawing-room once more, though the mood was heavy with distrust and exhaustion. Conversation was sparse, punctuated by nervous glances and tentative whispers. The flickering firelight danced across faces marked by worry, suspicion, and guarded secrets. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the uneasy calm. The group rushed toward the source, a side corridor near the servants' quarters, only to find that Viola was missing. "Vanished?" Allen gasped, his voice tight with panic. "No sign of struggle," Carter reported grimly, searching the hall. "Her room is empty, the window shut tight. No footprints in the wet garden outside. Poirot's gaze swept the room, calm but piercing. A disappearance under such circumstances is no accident, Hastings. Miss Viola is in danger. Or worse, she is playing a part in a dangerous game. Mrs. March wrung her hands, her face pale. Aunt Margaret's theatrics have gone beyond the pale. Or perhaps, Poirot said softly, Viola has secrets she wishes to keep hidden. Alan paced the room, his frustration mounting. If she is hiding, she must come forward before more harm is done. Poirot nodded. And we must discover what drove her to vanish. Was it fear, guilt, or a calculated move in a deadly chess game? Dr. Shaw stepped forward. I suggest we search the estate carefully and question everyone thoroughly. Mr. Quinn agreed. And prepare for all contingencies. We are in a house where trust is scarce and danger is near. As the search began, Poirot lingered by the window, watching the relentless rain. The night deepens, Hastings, and with it the shadows. To find Miss Viola, we must first understand what she fears and whom she fears most. A sudden knock on the door startled us. Carter entered, breathless. Mademoiselle Viola has been found, in the garden shed. She appears unharmed but shaken. We hurried outside, the storm's fury driving us forward. Viola sat on a wooden bench, wrapped in a shawl, eyes wide with fright. They were following me, she whispered. I don't know who they are, but I heard them talk of the final act and closing the coffin. I had to hide. Poirot's expression was grave. The players multiply, Hastings, and the game grows ever more perilous. The question remains, who, among us, desires to say, "Good night, Mr. Coffin, for real"? Chapter 10. Poirot's quiet reflection. After Viola's sudden return, the household retreated into uneasy silence. The storm outside had settled into a relentless drizzle, but within Coffin Hall, the tension remained as thick as ever. The weight of suspicion bore down on every soul gathered there. That evening, Poirot requested the seclusion of the library, a sanctuary of worn leather-bound volumes and whispered histories. I joined him, noting the subtle exhaustion beneath his composed exterior. Mon ami, Poirot began, the hour has come for the little grey cells to work in solitude. The theatre of shadows demands clarity born of quiet. He settled into a high-backed chair, steepling his fingers as he reviewed the details we had gathered. The displaced rug, Mrs. March's fall, the threatening notes, Edwin's assault, Viola's disappearance. Each was a thread woven into a tangled tapestry of motives and misdirection. Observe, Hastings, he said, that not all is as it seems. For example, the rug. Was it truly a trap or an innocent accident? Mrs. March's fall. Fear, yes, but fear of what? And the notes. Their authorship is deliberate, meant to unnerve. I nodded. And Edwin's attack, too violent to be a mere warning. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactly. But here is the twist. The attack occurred in the East Wing. Yet the letter hinted at dangers where the raven flies. The crest, the symbol, is everywhere. But where does the truth hide? He rose, moving to the window and staring into the stormy night. Then there is Viola's flight. Was it panic or part of a plan? And who watched her in the shadows? I wondered aloud. Could someone be orchestrating this entire drama to pit family against family? Poirot smiled faintly. A clever thought. Aunt Margaret was a master of manipulation. Her final act may have been to expose those hidden fissures and watch them crack. He paced slowly, then paused. The will names Isabel Trent, unknown to most, a keeper of secrets. Hastings, I suspect that Isabel holds the key to this mystery. Do we know where to find her? Not yet, but I intend to learn. Meanwhile, we must watch closely, for the real danger lies not in accidents, but in deliberate betrayal. His gaze fixed on me with quiet intensity. Soon, Hastings, the pieces will fall into place, and when they do, the true meaning of "Good night, Mr. Coffin" will be revealed. Chapter 11. The Denouement. The storm outside had finally begun to wane, its furious clamour reduced to a distant murmur. Within Coffin Hall, the atmosphere was taut with anticipation, as if the house itself awaited the revelation about to unfold. Poirot stood at the head of the great dining table, his posture calm yet commanding. Around him sat the family and their guests, each face a mask of curiosity, anxiety, or thinly veiled defiance. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, "the time has come to unveil the truth hidden beneath layers of deceit and fear. The mystery of "Good night, Mr. Coffin" is no mere family jest, but a calculated game of shadows, one that has cost us dearly." He glanced around the room, letting his gaze linger on each person. First, the displaced rug in the library, a simple device intended to trip and disarm. Mrs. March's fall was no accident but a warning designed to sow fear. The threatening notes, the attack on Edwin, Viola's disappearance, all orchestrated to unbalance this household. He paused, drawing a small envelope from his pocket. And yet, the true key lies in Aunt Margaret's choice of heir, Isabel Trent, a distant relative and keeper of secrets. Isabel has been hidden, her identity concealed by years of family discord. I have located her in a nearby village, and she carries with her the final piece of this tragic puzzle. Arlen's eyes narrowed. "You mean there's more?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Isabel reveals that years ago a grievous betrayal fractured this family, an inheritance stolen, a secret child disavowed. Margaret Raines's final act was to expose that sin and exact a reckoning." He turned toward Damon Black. "Mr. Black, your impatience for inheritance is no secret, but your role in this drama is darker still." The financier's expression hardened. "What are you implying?" "That you sought to silence Edwin Raines, who had uncovered evidence of financial malfeasance implicating you. Your threats, your attempts to unsettle this family, and the attack were calculated to secure your position." Viola's gaze flashed. "And you, Mr. Quill, the solicitor who would read the will?" Poirot's smile was faint. "A reluctant accomplice, pressured by debts and fear, but not the mastermind." He turned to Mrs. March. "And you, keeper of Aunt Margaret's secrets, guardian of her vengeance, you played your part with grim resolve." The room stirred, murmurs rising. Poirot raised a hand. "But the greatest surprise is this." He unfolded a second letter, reading aloud. "To the family I once loved and now chastise. The past must be faced before the future can be embraced. Trust has been broken, but truth shall heal. Good night, Mr. Coffin. May your rest be just." He looked pointedly at Arlen. The author was none other than Aunt Margaret herself, whose last will was not just a legal document, but a moral compass, pointing to justice rather than inheritance. Arlen exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders. "So, the threats, the dangers, all part of her design?" "Exactly," Poirot affirmed. "A test to reveal character, to unmask ambition and guilt. And now, with the truth known, the family may begin to heal." The assembled company exchanged glances, some relieved, others chastened. Poirot concluded softly, "Justice is a delicate balance. Tonight it has been restored, not by law alone, but by the courage to confront one's own shadows." Chapter 12. Epilogue. The twist after midnight. The storm had finally passed, leaving a chill dawn light creeping through the tall windows of Coffin Hall. The household was quieter now, the weight of the night's revelation settling into a tentative calm. Yet, as Poirot often reminded me, the end of one act is merely the prelude to another. As the company gathered for a subdued breakfast, there was an undercurrent of exhaustion, but also of cautious hope. Arlen sat beside Viola, their earlier tension softened by the shared ordeal. Edwin, though bruised, was resting comfortably under Dr. Shaw's care. Even Mrs. March appeared less guarded, her eyes reflecting a reluctant acceptance. Poirot, ever the observer, lingered near the window, his gaze distant yet attentive. I approached quietly, curious about his thoughts. "Hastings," he said without turning, "the case, as you know, is not yet fully closed. While the main threads have been untangled, there remains one final knot." My eyebrows rose. "Another twist! Always, my friend, do you see this letter?" He held up a small envelope, edged in black, which had arrived just moments ago, slipped discreetly beneath the front door. I took it carefully and unfolded the crisp paper. It read, "To Monsieur Poirot, the game is not yet finished. There is one who played the part of victim, yet holds the dagger still. Look closely where the raven's shadow falls, and you will find the true Mr. Coffin. Good night, until we meet again." A chill ran down my spine. Poirot's eyes sparkled with that familiar gleam. The hand that orchestrated much from the shadows now reveals itself. The final act, Hastings, is yet to come. We turned to find Viola watching us intently, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I know," she said softly. "I had to disappear because I uncovered more than anyone suspected. The family secrets run deeper, and not all are ready to be unearthed." Arlen looked at her, a mixture of disbelief and concern. Poirot smiled wryly. "As ever, the game of good night, Mr. Coffin, is one of patience and wit. We must await the next move, but rest assured, justice, as ever, will find its way." The dawn light grew stronger, illuminating the raven crest above the mantelpiece, a silent witness to the night's shadows and secrets. And so, as the sun rose over Coffin Hall, the story closed on a note both final and foreboding, leaving us with the quiet certainty that in the world of mystery, no good night is ever truly the end.